So now we move on to section 3, blockchain use cases and technology hurdles. Our next speaker is good friend and buddy Anthony Lewis, Director of Research at R3. So Anthony, his role is to produce reports and run seminars on the evolving concepts, technologies, and vendors in the DLT landscape for R3 and the wider Singapore and APAC community. He's been working on the distributed ledger technology DLT since joining ItBit, now known as Paxos. He also writes a personal blog in which I always read myself, bitsandblocks.net. Prior to Bitcoins and blockchains, Anthony was a technology project and product manager at Credit Suisse in London and Singapore, and started his career banking days as an FX trader at Barclays Capital. Please welcome Anthony.
Morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Do I need to stand here, or can you hear me if I walk out here? I'm going to have to shout if I walk out here, don't I? Okay, all right, let's stay here. So building the business case, this is the elusive part of all of this hype that we've been subjected to. It's like, well, who's going to make the money? Who's going to save the money? How's it going to work? Okay. As Anson mentioned, I'm a director of research at R3. We'll talk about R3 probably towards the end of this session, because people do often ask me, what is this company, what does it do, and how can it help us? And the answer varies depending on who you are. Let's look at the industry. I think many of us know this already. Are you coming up to fix something? Oh, I'm too flighty, aren't I? Thank you. Okay, this is better. Okay, thank you. I think most of us know this, but it's worth recapping. Businesses are increasingly interconnected. Okay, so whether you're in a finance or supply chain or trade finance, companies are talking to each other at a much more rapid pace, and the need to know stuff and the need to know stuff about you, about your relationships, and about business deals is becoming more and more important, and the pace at which you need to know stuff, it's now, not, oh, it's fine if you tell me tomorrow. So businesses are especially with the advent of, if you look at the manufacturing industry, just-in-time processes, you need to know right now what's available and what you can get at. So I'm going to talk mainly about finance. I may talk about supply chains and trade finance as well. This was an idea borrowed from supply chains. However, the technology to support those businesses has lagged behind the processes. Okay, so I'm going to talk about two concepts. One is internal technology. So that's the tech you use within your organization. So think your internal emails, your chats, your SharePoints, all of that internal stuff, your workflow process management. So that's your internal technology. And that's actually really, really good. Now, I can see some of you eye-rolling saying, no, our technology is really crap. But no, it's actually really good compared with the technology that joins businesses together. Okay, so you've got this quite good internal technology. The standard is quite high. But the technology that connects your business with other businesses has not had the same investment, and it's much more low-tech. You end up resorting, because your systems do not interoperate, do not talk to each other, in a safe, secure, trusted manner which you need, you end up reverting to the lowest common denomination of technology. And sometimes, if you're lucky, that's emails and PDFs attached. If you're really lucky, it's APIs. But if you're unlucky, it's faxes and things like that, because someone somewhere wants to see a photocopy of a wet ink signature. So the technology that joins entities, that joins businesses, has really lagged the technology to support businesses from within. And data is constrained in silos. We've got a mess of legacy systems that operate to different standards, that do not interoperate in a way which we need them to. And this data could be anything from financial asset data to contractual data to logistical data. And because once that data is out there, you have no more control of that data. The data tends to be constrained within organizations. Now we're going to talk about this technology, DLT, distributed ledger technology, where for the first time you can retain control, mutual control of data and the evolution of that data with another party. But the point is, existing technology can no longer adequately support business-to-business processes that have become complex. Now, of course, everything becomes complex eventually because you use the something becomes difficult, then there's new technology that comes out. You adopt the technology, everything's easy for a bit. And then people build processes and stuff on top of that, and then it becomes difficult again. And then some more technology comes along to make things easier, and things are easier for a bit. And this is just the story of how technology supports business. And we're there now. We're at that stage where the B2B processes are complex, and the technology isn't quite there to support it until, of course, distributed ledgers come along. So what are we aiming for? And I think we all know this by now. It's reduce risks, reduce costs, and hopefully less inefficiencies. It's not just blockchains and distributed ledgers that creates this. It's all the things from dematerialization of paper, more APIs. It's automation, just business process, workflow automation. But distributed ledgers do help in a very significant way, which we'll talk about. And of course, the numbers, everyone's heard of or have come across the Santander report from a year or two ago, $20 billion a year saved by financial services industry if adoption is to the level that people hope for. So you have these reduced risks and costs. And then on the upside, because costs are not very sexy. No one really likes talking about costs. So on the upside, you increase transparency. So whether that's supply chain transparency or whether that's transparency over your data, their data, the business processes that you've both signed up to and have committed to, that transparency can actually lead to better pricing. If you imagine that you're a business and you are doing pretty well, but your bank just won't give you those loans at a decent rate. But you want to be able to prove to them that their money is safe because you've got all of these pieces of the machine that are going to come together. If the banks can have better visibility into you and up your supply chain, not just within your organization, because remember, we're more interconnected now, but if they can have access to your supply chain, then hopefully you get better rates when you're asking for working capital financing. Finally, new business opportunities, which I'll touch on in a few minutes. But there is the opportunity to create actually new businesses entirely. So far, what I've talked about is existing businesses doing things in a incrementally better way. So how do we build that business case? So there's a bit of a journey. In fact, there's three. There's the educational journey. So this is people within organizations and their level of understanding of this technology. And that's somewhere between 0 and 100. Okay, so let's think of volume sliders on a DJ deck, right? So anyone in any organization can be anywhere on that scale. There's the organizational journey. So this is once enough people understand this technology enough, how is the organization going to react? Like which parts of the and there's politics involved, of course, because we're talking about large companies here. So which departments are going to benefit? Which departments are not going to benefit? How is this going to work? Do you need to structure the company slightly differently? Do you need operational change? So there's that organizational journey from, okay, so you've got a bunch of people in the room who kind of understand this technology, but their business operationally cannot deal with it. So how are you going to move? How are you going to change the org to make the most of this technology? And of course, there's the commercial journey. How do we make money out of this? Okay, how do we save money? How do we make money? So you've got these kind of three sliders. And if you look at if you take any group of people from any organization, they're somewhere on each of those kind of scales, on each of those dimensions. And you could look at the same business in a different city or in a different country. And the sliders would be in a completely different configuration because information doesn't flow very well across companies. Like so occasionally we talk to banks and we sit in the room and they're amazing. They know they're 100% on their educational journey. Organizationally, they have a plan for how they're going to adopt this technology, and commercially, they have some sort of plan as to how much they're going to save by adopting this. And you talk to the very same bank in a different country, and it looks very, very different. The conversations you're having are very different. You go back to explaining what is a blockchain and trying to describe the difference between Bitcoin and distributed ledgers. So that's the journey we're all on, and part of what R3 does is nudge people along those journeys on all three of those dimensions. So what do we have? What are the tools? So we talked about blockchains, distributed ledgers. One of the most important things for me is these multilateral assurances. So assurances, bilateral or multilateral, guaranteed by technology rather than third parties. So these assurances could be anything from data assurances. So the technology now guarantees that what you see in your database is the same as what they see in their database without needing a third party to tell you to be the golden source, to tell you what you should be seeing. Or it could be business processes. Okay, so your data so distributed ledgers provides kind of assured or guaranteed transparency over data, and also business processes. And this is when people talk about smart contracts. Smart contracts are nothing but little bits of code which both parties commit to running. And if you put the same thing in the top and you run the same code, then you'll get the same thing out of the bottom. For public blockchains like Ethereum, it's probably around 10,000 computers around the world who are running the same bits of logic. But for industry, for distributed ledgers, you don't want your competitors, I think we heard it earlier, you don't want your competitors running your logic, seeing your data and all of that kind of stuff, even if it is encrypted. What's the point? Why would you do that? So with Corda, the distributed ledger that's been built for finance, only those who need to know about the data, those who need transparency, and those who need to understand the processes know. Finally, what this technology has given us is legitimate, unique financial assets, and this came from the Bitcoin days. So a financial asset is generally a contract between two parties, even if it's cash. Cash is either a contract between you and your commercial bank or you and the central bank. And this technology has given us this way of without a central third party, without a central custodian, it's given us a way of saying, well, this financial asset is unique, and someone hasn't tried to duplicate it and use it with multiple times. So these are the tools which have been unlocked or enabled by distributed ledgers. And I want to be very clear here that not all blockchains are the same. Not all distributed ledgers are the same. So these statements of maybe factual for some flavors and maybe incorrect or misleading for other flavors. So the business case. The business case really depends who you are. Okay? So app developers, hopefully the business case is pretty straightforward. So blockchains are platforms. Okay? Think of like Windows as an operating system. It's kind of useful. It does stuff in the background. But really what the users want is applications on top of that make use of that operating system. And the apps are useful for people and businesses. So, for example, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. So blockchains are kind of dirty. Well, blockchains are platform technologies. They're not the things that people should be interacting with. Okay. So what do app developers do? They build apps on top of distributed ledgers, taking advantages of the benefits of distributed ledgers that we talked about just now. And hopefully the monetization model is straightforward. Build an app, sell it, charge license fees, software as a service, however you want to charge people for using your app, which is going to save them time and money and make the world a better place. If you're a systems integrator and a consultant, so think the big four, think the IT outsourcing vendors. Hopefully the business case is obvious too. We're starting to see RFPs, so requests for proposals, when businesses want a distributed ledger enabled X, whatever X is, some app, something that does something that benefits their business. And so what do they need? They pay an app developer to develop the app, and they pay a systems integrator to get it into their IT estate. And possibly there's a need for consultants to do the change management process and the target operating models. So hopefully the business case for those kinds of companies is relatively straightforward. So now we get to the consumer. This is a finance conference. So banks, asset managers, people who are going to businesses who have people who are going to click on this stuff and use it in their day jobs. Okay, so how do we come to that business case? So here's the question to ask yourself as a consumer. So why would you need an app that provides multilateral shared control of data? So this is the ability to control, to have shared control over data between you and your counterparty. Assured business process automation. And improved financial interactions, so less risky financial interactions. So why would you need apps that do that? It's a kind of rhetorical question, because I think these three are all huge benefits to, they benefit different parties differently, but this is all stuff that people look at and go, I want that, okay? Especially in banks, especially in ops departments of banks, okay? So let's split that into three. Let's split it into kind of what I call bilateral business cases, or it could be trilateral, multilateral, but small use cases. So and industry business cases, so that's for an ecosystem, think trade finance. So the first one, think two banks doing an over-the-counter deal. In the middle, industry business cases, think trade finance as an ecosystem. And then finally, we talk about new business opportunities. So when we talk about bilateral business cases, what are we thinking of? We're thinking of the benefits are assured data equivalence and assured multilateral processes, okay? Keep on banging this home. So how do you build the business case? Well, it's costs of how you're doing it today versus costs of how you're going to do it in the future. It's kind of 101 is kind of dull. So you look at your tech license fees, you look at your operational headcount, your management overhead. That's in the happy case. That's your current costs. As you go along. Then you look at the risk events. So how often do things go wrong in the way you're currently doing it? And how much does it cost you when things go wrong? And then you can multiply that up and find your annual cost of risks becoming events. And that's your kind of cost of doing this business right now, for whatever process it is we're talking about. And you compare that to what the world will be like with distributed ledgers, and there are various costs associated. I'm not going to pretend that everyone's kind of holding hands and dancing in circles here. You've got to introduce the technology, so there's costs associated with using it, bringing a new technology to enterprise. Then there's the parallel run stage. And many banks, many of our clients are at that introduction phase now. This is people talk about the investment into, should we continue investing in distributed ledgers? Then there's the parallel run phase. So you've got your existing system, and now you're adding a new system to your IT estate, which is already horrendously complex. Hopefully when you do this, you're proving out the new technology, and hopefully some of those risks that we talked about have already collapsed because you're relying on the new technology to support the old technology. And then finally, you've got the replacement where you can sunset the old technology and rely on this new technology. And then there's the residual risk, because we're not saying this cures all risks. Okay? There's the what else can go wrong and how often, how much, etc. And that's the kind of, and a lot of these concepts are hard to put a number to. And it gets even harder when you talk about industries and new business opportunities. But that's the kind of mentality that we have to have while building the business case. So let's expand this a bit and talk about industries. Now we're thinking, do we have an industry where there's a golden source of data or a centralized business process as a result of parties either not being able to trust each other, or the networks got too busy that it's worth having a third party to deal with all of that stuff? How do you think about that? You look at your current costs. Now, remember, we're paying a third party. We're paying an intermediary here. So direct costs, and think of the fees you're paying, and also the indirect costs. So how much does it cost your organization to support the fact that you're using this third party? Now, the risk events are slightly different. There's more things out of your control here. You've got the how often, how much. So how often does something bad happen, and how much does it cost you? But also, you've given up some sovereignty over your data. The moment you share data with that third party, you've lost a certain type of control over it. What if, and you don't have control over their cybersecurity, so what if there are privacy leaks, and how much does that cost you when they get hacked and when there's a privacy leak over there? And then finally, with third parties, especially third parties with pseudo monopolistic status, there's a lack of incentive to innovate. because if you've got almost monopoly status, you just want to sit there and crank out the money. And there's the incentives actually to turn the screws on your clients rather than to make things faster, better, cheaper for them. So there's all sorts of different incentives pulling third parties in different directions. And then you compare that to your distributed ledger case. Now, the new business opportunities. So what if you've identified situations where actually a third party might, on the face of it, be a good idea? Well, why don't you just centralize this or have a utility for that or do this? None currently exists. And it feels like, because we haven't had distributed ledgers before, it feels like a third party would be a natural thing to do in this case. But for some reason, you can't or people won't. This is a greenfield site, right? So possibly because of constraints around data privacy or there's some political stalemate. Let's say you're dealing with a group of countries. Maybe all the countries maybe every country wants to run it, and they don't want the other countries to run it. Or maybe no one wants to run it because it's a kind of political hot potato because of concentration risk or whatever. Somehow we're in this state where it would make sense to have a centralized third party, but it can't happen. Now distributed ledgers are a potential solution because you don't have to have that central entity. So here's where it gets buzzwordy, and I kind of hate myself a little bit for saying these things. So you have a convergence, a confluence between Internet of Things and cloud and blockchain, or what I call connected sensors, computer rentals, and distributed ledgers. Okay, so the Internet of Things gives us more data at an unprecedented rate. This data can be analyzed and used to trigger events and automate things. The cloud gives us elastic computing, so you don't have to buy new hardware and have it shipped in order to perform complex calculations. You just get out your credit card and pay a little bit more. And then the distributed ledgers gives us what we talked about in the earlier slide, which is these assurances that data and processes are being adhered to by your counterparties. And we've never had those assurances before. The best we've had before is some auditor will tell you that their processes that they're following their processes, but we've never had this kind of granular at the database level guarantee that they're following exactly what was previously discussed. So this convergence of the technologies is creating opportunities for new business models. What are we seeing? So as R3, we're seeing a few things. Firstly, a new model for innovation. I was recently giving a talk to one of our member banks, and the talk was about innovation, how innovation is innovating, how we're changing how we innovate. And we're seeing intense collaboration. So the world's most competitive financial institutions are now working together, sharing intellectual property and sharing resources and people, and physically getting in rooms and coding stuff. That's never, ever happened before. Okay, so the way we are innovating is changing, and that's fascinating. We're seeing the business cases that people are going after initially are the incremental benefits ones. So ones that are, here's how we do our business now. Can this technology help to slightly improve that? Yes, good, let's go ahead and do that. But the transformational change, the ecosystem-wide change is following closely. People are talking about, well, how can we transform this industry? Obviously, that's going to take longer to get to the market because there are more moving parts, but that is coming. And here are all the parties involved that are intensely interested in this. So you've got the businesses, the end consumers, but we've also got the regulators. So apropos the talk just before mine, we're bringing regulators to the table, not just individually, but multilaterally. We're joining regulators together to have these conversations and to share knowledge and to share understanding. And we're bringing regulators to the businesses in a way that they haven't had before. So this is really valuable. Tech startups, so entrepreneurs with good ideas of what apps to build, and potentially other DLT platforms. Systems integrators and change managers, that's the IT, I guess traditionally we call them the outsourcers and the consultants. So that's, and they're all working together to drive this technology forward. I get asked this question, so here's my quick 1-minute explainer on what's R3. We're a software company using distributed ledger technology to build the next generation of financial services infrastructure. What's interesting is this line keeps on changing because we started off being very financial service focused, but now we're getting a lot of inbound queries from non-finance, and it's starting to come from things like supply chains. Okay, now supply chains do interact with finance because there's working capital financing and invoice financing and things like that. But we're starting to see, and we're not going after them. It's inbound, which is interesting. And we have two things. We have a consortium and we have a technology called Corda. And the consortium, we've got over 18 members. That's not just banks. That's banks, regulators, asset managers, participants from all corners of finance, cards and payments, for example. And what do they get? We run projects with them. Not all 80 at once. That would be difficult. But smaller groups. We run projects, and they get access to the learnings from historical projects. Research, this regulatory outreach, and professional services, training, etc. And then the technology Corda, which is an open source, so anyone can download it, use it, hack it, do what they want with it, with the source code, that is. It's a financial-grade distributed ledger that allows for those things that I talked about earlier. So synchronized data between peers and synchronized financial agreements with certain assurances and guarantees built on top of that, and your business process automation. And then the next question people always ask is there's so many blockchains around, how do I differentiate them? What's the difference between IBM's Fabric and R3's Corda and JP Morgan's Quorum and things like that? So here are a few things, and I can't speak to the others, but here are a few things I do know about Corda. We built it through collaboration. So Corda was built in a very old school manner, where we gathered requirements, and then we designed it, and now we're building it. And of course, we're building it in an agile way, but we did this kind of thing that makes sense rather than trying to get requirements as you go along. It was built through collaboration with over 40, back then we had 42 members of the consortium. So over 40 members with hundreds of architects, bank architects, people, subject matter experts who know their stuff. And this is why this was built for finance. And that's unique. We've solved the blockchain privacy challenges. So again, from this morning, with a traditional blockchain, you're sharing all your data with all your competitors, and in some cases that's lunacy. So with Corda, we call it a distributed ledger because it isn't a blockchain. It doesn't have blocks and chains. We don't bundle together private transactions and then send them to everyone on the network. Data is shared on a need-to-know basis. If I do a deal with you, you and I need to get consensus over that deal. But our competitors don't need to see that. Okay. We build in legal interaction right into the code. So unlike some other blockchains which say code is law, whatever happens in the code is the law. That's what happens. We actually think that businesses operate in a wider context with legal frameworks and which have been built up through over hundreds of years. So right into the contracts all refer back to, or can all refer back to real contracts, ISDA agreements, real like PDFs, things that lawyers can discuss. And that's really important because computers, you can't account for every single thing that's going to happen. And if you look at a contract, there's always some vagueness to it, and that's usually deliberate, done for the benefit of both parties. Things like force majeure. If something happens that we know that we haven't considered before, how do we deal with that? Well, you go to a court and you get an answer from the court. So that's built right in, and then finally we uniquely can have open interoperable networks. So this is a little bit like how the internet was built. So with Corda, you can have multiple networks that can come together, that can start off independently and then later on merge together to form wider networks. And then so assets that were constrained to one network can now move across to the wider network. And that's really how the internet works as well. If you think of the internet, actually, it is a bunch of private networks that are joined together with a common protocol. And legal agreements. You have a legal agreement with your internet service provider, and then they have agreements with other people. And that's how the internet was formed, multiple networks that come together. And that's what we've been thinking when we designed Corda. So final slide. I want to end with some love. I don't think there's enough love in the world. So financial services loves Corda because it's the only DLT platform that solves the privacy issue and the regulatory needs. Okay. Integration partners also love Corda because it's not subjected to vendor lock-in. You don't have to run it on specific hardware. And in this context right now, vendor lock-in is the last thing you want. You don't want to be tied to any particular large vendors, for example. And then finally, developers really love Corda because it uses the same tools they're used to, and you don't have to learn new languages and things like that. And it's interoperable with existing systems. For example, we use Java, and who doesn't know Java? So 9 million developers, or whatever the number is, can immediately start working with Corda. We call that Corda love. Okay. And that's it. So thank you very much.
Any questions? Yes.
Do we have time for questions, Dean? 1 minute.
One question.
One question.
All right. So, thanks, Anthony. I think interesting presentation. So I got a question on your business case, basically. So, yes, any new technology comes, it takes its own due time to evolve, and basically people understand it and then build on solution in iterative and incremental way. Coming to this Corda consortium and people sharing their knowledge and IP things, have you seen any, problems solved actually, say within country for a specific industry so far coming into production? There are challenges, people are at different stages, but something has moved forward to an advanced stage?
So remember last year people were saying that it would be 10 years before any of this hits production? Mm-hmm. Right, and you're asking me this, you asked me 1 year later, have I seen anything go into production? It's a bit early for that. We've seen things moving from proof of concept to pilot, and you've read CoinDesk, and CoinDesk will show you, one example of a cotton trade going into production and things like that, but are they scalable? Who knows? I think it's a process that will take some time. We've committed to getting something working in production by the end of the year, so maybe December 31st is a better date to ask that. But there's absolutely progress from many of our clients to move forwards to production. And remember, it's going to start not with the massively profound things. It's going to start with the things that make you slightly more efficient. Maybe it reduces some risks, but it's not going to be bank wide. It's going to be for one particular product or something, because this is how technology works. It's not often a big bang. You got to try it out first. And of course, as we get closer to commercialization, people talk about things less because it becomes a commercial secret that you don't want people to latch onto and to copy very quickly.
Yeah, so I think exactly on the same point, right? So you said it will take time, right? So it's all an iterative thing, right? Production hitting means basically piloting, right? So before we do a big bang of the solution, right, to millions of consumers or users, it has to get into production to a limited set of customers to see how it operates and what are the additional challenges in the production environment. So I guess maybe a reduced piece of functionality has to move forward in the production, and they move it back and forth basically to evolve from there.
Yeah. And look, as of today, none of the blockchains are production ready. Yeah. You can't point to a single blockchain or distributed ledger software and say that's going into production tomorrow. It's not there yet. You've still got to talk about privacy, scalability, interoperability, identity, and all of those issues before you get to a real scalable production, enterprise-ready solution.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to take my usual picture to tweet. Everyone look like you're interested. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much.